So, thanks for joining the Entrepreneurs Family Podcast. The purpose of this podcast is to learn how very successful entrepreneurs are optimizing their businesses, like Jeremiah here, and what they are doing to balance their business with their family life. My name is Riley Thornock, and I'm your host. A little about me: I have a bachelor's degree in marriage and family science from Brigham Young University and a master's degree in professional communication from Weber State University. I'm also an entrepreneur and I've built multiple businesses in the hospitality and real estate industries worth millions of dollars. I was raised in a multi-generational entrepreneurial family, and I currently have a family of my own with two small children. I intimately know the struggles of trying to balance my business with my home life, and I'm excited to learn from others like Jeremiah here and bring awareness to these issues with these through these interviews. Like I said, this is Jeremiah Maughan. He owns and operates a successful business while raising a beautiful family. He owns Vision Real Estate, which is a real estate brokerage in Utah that specializes in property management. There are about 60 people in the company, and they're managing, selling, and repairing about $350 million worth of real estate. His company uses an agent-centric approach to property management, which allows them to kind of bridge the gap between, personal touch of a mom and pop shop and with the strengths and breadths of larger companies. Jeremiah studied information systems, and he's been married for 12 years and has three energetic. Which are they, angelic or
Depends on
energetic?
what day it is.
Little girls. It depends upon the day.
Some days more so than others.
All right. Well, thanks for jumping on with me. I really appreciate it. As Jeremiah has just learned, he is my second interview. So, you know, I just really appreciate you coming on and supporting this. I think it's for a good cause overall. And I think that you've set a lot of great examples with some of the things that you've done. So tell me a little bit more about your business background and your overall history.
Yeah, that's the funny thing about property management. We all kind of fall into it different ways. There's not a lot of people that set out to make that their career.
Mm-hmm.
In my particular case, so I was going to college, like I said, studying information systems. And I'm the oldest in the family, and I've got a couple younger brothers. My dad decided that rather than pay rent for everybody, he wanted to buy a townhouse, put me and my brothers and a couple roommates in it, and as the oldest, I was in charge of managing it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started doing that, and I got involved in the local homeowner association. And one day I'm talking to a guy in the neighborhood about HOA stuff, and he said, "Well, tell me about what you're doing." So I told him I had some roommates I was renting to, and he said, "Well, maybe I'll have you try managing my place." And I was like, all right,
Sweet.
sure." So I talked to a friend of mine who was a property manager, and he gave me a lease and a management agreement and said, "Go nuts." So
Wow.
I started managing this guy's place, and I started picking up properties in my neighborhood over the course of going to college, got my real estate license. And when I graduated, I was up to 30 townhouses that I was managing in that neighborhood,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, well, I could go pursue my degree and go work for IBM or Accenture or PwC Consulting and do information systems management.
Mm-hmm.
But, I was like, well, let's see where this whole property management thing goes, because I had created it. I knew I could own it and keep it. And so that's what I did, and now we're obviously a much larger operation than we were when I first started. So,
Yeah. Yeah. It's much larger than anything I've been able to accomplish. $350 million worth of real estate. That's pretty impressive. So what about your business? Like, tell me about your biggest successes along this journey.
so it's I think the biggest success was finding a model that actually makes a difference for clients. So,
Mm-hmm.
uh, like you mentioned, we use this agent-centric approach to property management. Typical property management companies use what they call a staff-centric, well, what I call a staff-centric approach, where you've got
Uh,
one agent and a whole bunch of employees that are managing, tons and tons of units. So you have like one licensed agent for 400 units, and that's not a very personal touch.
right.
You kind of have to do that to make a good living. But what we've found is that in our brokerage, we found that if we used licensed agents to manage properties and we got them well trained,
Hmm.
so helping clients buy and sell, that they could have that personal touch while still making a good income. And
So
it's
you
certainly
use actual real estate agents.
all of our property managers are actually licensed agents. And yeah, in our state in particular, you have to be licensed to manage property, but there's a lot of ways where you can just simply use staff
I see.
on that. But we prefer to have uh, agents specifically from the leasing all the way through the client contact.
Interesting.
So,
Okay. So
that's
it allows you basically to um, just have more people available one-on-one basis, basically.
it definitely allows that. The most successful part is that because the agents have a smaller portfolio, they really know their clients well. And so the clients have a lot of confidence in them. The agents know the properties well, so the agents are able to meet the needs of the tenants easily. And that's really helped us stand out. And honestly, our client retention is extremely high as a result. We don't typically lose a client unless the client's selling a property.
How many agents do you have working for you right now or
So,
with you?
so in the whole company, we have 60 employees. Of the 60, about 20 are agents.
Okay. All right. Okay. I was just trying to figure out how that worked. So if people wanted to actually use your real estate agency um, for future real estate, what are they going to have to do to find you? Just, I guess, Google Vision Real Estate or
There's probably a couple other Vision real estate. So UtahRentals.com is our website. We manage specifically in Utah. So if somebody's got a business has a rental outside of Utah, I could give them advice, but that's about what it's like to be a property manager. But I'd probably recommend I can refer them to some trade organizations in different areas to find good property managers. But we're specifically in Utah. Uh,
okay.
we cover the counties in and around Salt Lake area.
Okay. Well, cool. I know I used Jeremiah for one of my rental properties back a while ago, and yeah, it worked really well in a lot of ways. Um, I mean, I think that with his background and so forth, it really made a difference in making our property run smoothly overall. I mean, there were a couple of hiccups, but that's just real estate in general.
Yeah, welcome to property management, right?
Yeah, right. And you got any crazy stories before we move on?
Oh, so
Just
many.
random crazy story. I'm sure you got a few.
So
I know that you've had to learn how to protect yourself, in this industry, among other things.
yeah. Today's random story was we had a tenant who wanted to get out of their lease
Uh-huh.
due to the COVID thing, and unfortunately fortunately, I guess, they were not directly affected by COVID. Unfortunately for them, that meant we weren't going to let them out of their lease. And they apparently contacted the newspaper, and so we got a phone call from a reporter, and so
Mm.
I had to kind of explain a little bit about how the process works and why we still have to make sure that renters are paying their rent.
What was the reasoning? Just he didn't want to pay for it anymore, or
Yeah, most of the that this was a student, and so the with the universities being shut down, the student
oh, I see.
yeah they wanted to go home. They didn't want to stay. They rent. Well,
Yeah, it does get challenging in certain circumstances, knowing what the exact right answer is. But I mean, you're looking out for the best interests of your clients, and you know, anybody coming in with an excuse or a reason, it could get very costly very quickly if you don't set boundaries and so forth, I'm sure.
I mean, that's really right. It's the boundaries. I mean, setting boundaries makes a big difference. Setting expectations makes a big difference. So,
Mm, okay. Well, I hear your background as far as it's kind of interesting how you've worked your way into this program and how you've set up your model. Um, are there any other aspects of how you've gone about this that have attributed to your success, like overall, or um, I mean, because
yeah,
I know it can't. I mean, your story's been like 10 minutes. I know that there's probably a lot of different stories, a lot of different lessons you've learned along the way. I mean, you don't get to the size of company that you have right now without um, some serious learning curves, I'm sure.
yeah. Honestly, I have a sick sense of humor. I guess I don't know. It's you kind of
Okay,
be a little crazy to be a property manager, and I suppose
right.
you have to be as well to be an entrepreneur. Um, to
Yeah,
a little crazy in the head. We joke that especially property management, but I think with entrepreneurship in general, you really have to have the stomach for this sort of thing. Uh,
mm,
there's an element of there's a lot of unknown that comes with being an entrepreneur. You don't know if your model's going to work. You don't know if you're going to be able to get customers. You don't really know everything involved in running a business.
right.
Uh, as a property manager, just so many weird things happen that we just don't know. I mean, we still have new things happen
All the
on
time, I'm sure.
even after 18 years of doing this. So the way we look at it, kind of, as, I look for compulsive problem solvers. That's kind of the term we use, where somebody who they don't really get discouraged by people complaining about them, because we have to hold them accountable. People are going to get mad about that sometimes.
All
Uh,
right.
they don't get discouraged if things break. We just fix it. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Challenges are just simply opportunities to overcome, to learn. And so, but we have found that there are personalities that are compulsive problem solvers that get excited to solve a problem, and personalities that just they want to do a job, but don't necessarily have that drive to solve problems. And what's interesting about entrepreneurship is, I was fortunate to learn from an incredible entrepreneur professor at the university, and he's continued to be a mentor. And one of the things he taught is that entrepreneurship isn't about finding, it's not about finding like the perfect product. It's about identifying a problem,
Mm-hmm.
solving a problem. So if you can identify a problem and solve it, you can be successful. And that's something um, that I think, because I personally have a compulsive problem-solving personality, um, that has really driven me. I've yet to be burned out after 18 years of doing this because I have that element. And it is hard in our particular model, being agent centric. Our humans are a big part of what we do, and I've really had to learn how to. I can maybe say more about that later, but kind of be a good leader of people, and that's been a challenge for sure. So.
Right. I imagine that there's a few things that are going on in my head. I'm gonna go into this a little bit later, but just that compulsive need. You talked about a few things. The compulsive need to be a problem solver and a fixer. That is what entrepreneurship is about. You're constantly working to improve, but that does also have an interesting effect on family. I'm sure you, as a family man, as well as me, I've experienced it a lot, where it's especially hard for entrepreneurs to just listen in a family setting and not compulsively try to fix it. And I know it's a like kind of a man thing to begin with, but especially for entrepreneurs. But before I get into that, I wanted to ask you one more question about your business in particular. You're kind of I understand that you're kind of dealing with two different clients to a degree. You've got your and they're employees, but they're also kind of clients because you're trying to train them and build them, and it sounds like it's kind of a unique structure. So you have them that you're trying to work with as well as your customers, and I'm sure that that's kind of an interesting dynamic. I'm sure that you could say quite a bit about that. I'm just going to let you talk for a minute.
Sure. We in a sense, as a brokerage, we're trying to please three different groups.
Mm-hmm.
So our fiduciary duty is the client, and the client
Right.
is the rental owner, the buyer, the seller. And then on the other side, we have the customer, which is the tenant. So we look at the client and customer relationship first. So the tenant's over here, and we're trying, and we're trying as brokers, we're bringing a client's product to a customer.
It is kind of complicated. I didn't even bring into account the you have three different legs to that you're working with,
Yep.
trying to coordinate. I accounted for two, but yeah, there are three, in fact.
Yep, and that third one are the agents themselves that are the brokering that are doing the brokering. They're the service providers, and so we need to make sure uh, because we are a real estate brokerage, our property managers are technically independent contractors, and but the thing with independent contractors is they still have obligations. They still need to maintain our standards and expectations. Otherwise,
Right.
I'm not going to keep them part of our company. So, so we have to train our service providers to provide excellent service to our clients and our customers.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to know when there are weaknesses there so that we can address that. If I've got an agent who's not responding like they need to be, that's a problem, and I need to make sure that I know about that, and I can either train that up or I need to make a change there.
This makes a lot more sense to me as to when we did experience some of the challenges, in particular, how you handled it in changing me from one agent to another. Hearing you talk about it, it makes a lot more sense. Um,
Yeah,
but it's got to be a hard juggling act at certain points because I'm sure that, like from your agent's perspective, they get difficult clients that they're dealing with, and so you're trying to keep your employees happy to a degree because you're going to have some unreasonable clients, and then which could either be the tenant or the landlord, frankly.
right.
I mean, can you expound upon that? Like,
Sure, sure. So, one thing I learned fairly early on in this industry is take everything with a grain of salt and assume everybody's probably telling the truth, but they're still wrong. And, and
that's
so,
probably good advice for life in general.
their point of view, they are telling the truth.
Right,
Certainly we have liars, but for the most part, they're all kind of telling it from their point of view.
right.
And so you kind of take everybody's. It's a little cliched, what's your truth and what's your truth and what's your truth. The reality is that perception is reality for people.
Mm-hmm.
So I try to gather everybody's perceptions, try to distill the facts out of a situation, and and try to solve the problem. Again, I'm a compulsive problem solver. So in the case of a tenant, I try to meet their need. If they've got a reasonable need, I try to meet their need by training the manager to meet that need, or going to the owner and say, hey owner, this is a reasonable request. We feel like you should support this request.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately our loyalty is to our client, and so
Right.
we just have to tell the tenant, I'm sorry, I can't do that for you, and I have to be prepared for the fact that they might throw me under the bus publicly. And
Right.
property managers really struggle to have positive reviews just by the nature of our business.
Yeah.
And so that's why we'll ask for the owner to give us a positive review after we just stuck our neck
After,
out with them.
yeah. Yeah, that
Uh,
makes sense.
and then with the with an owner, we have one particular owner who he's just been a real challenge. He's been through 6 property managers. I
Oh
just can't
no.
him. And it's not the manager's fault, it's truly the owner's fault. Uh,
Right.
but some people say, why didn't you fire him? Uh, Frankly, because he's got 14 units with us, and I consider it really good practice for my newer managers. And so, if they can, he's challenging, but he's not. It's manageable.
Mm-hmm.
So I hang on to him, and when a manager gets burned out with dealing with him, I switch him to another manager. And it's kind of ironic. Now he actually pays a premium to us, and so the other reason we're willing to stick it out because he's
Yeah, that makes sense.
hard to work with.
Right.
It's kind of an
That's
unusual
interesting.
situation. But we do that. But then sometimes the managers themselves really do drop the ball.
Right.
And so we have. I recently hired an HR manager, which I kind of wish I had years ago because that's not a very strong position I have, or not a very strong. I like working with people. I'm a little. I see the best in people, at least I try to, which means sometimes I overlook things that maybe I should be holding them accountable for.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been um, that's been a challenge. And so I've hung on to people longer than I probably should be. They say you should be slow to hire and quick to fire, and I
Yeah, I don't really agree with that personally.
so
But
I,
I understand that from a practical cutthroat entrepreneur business perspective, I completely understand and agree that that's probably very practical advice.
yeah, because
But I'm kind of like you in the fact that I I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, work with people in their foibles, if you will.
yeah, and that's been very hard for me. So what I've tried to do, because I was being quick to hire because I needed to fill the need as quickly as I could,
Right.
and I'm slow to fire because I feel like people can be better than they are. Whereas the advice I've been given is, well, you should be slow to hire, meaning really make sure they're the right fit. Be really judicious. Do all your due diligence before you bring anybody on. Make sure that you are absolutely need somebody.
Mm-hmm.
But
And I think that there's probably good advice in between that for people like you and me who, aren't the cutthroat entrepreneur and actually want to work with people. Like an example in my business recently, we just lost an employee who, I didn't fire them. They just we parted ways basically. And, you know, I guess what I learned from that, especially as I looked at potentially refilling their spot, um, I'm not quick to refill that spot at this point because I'm trying to work with the dynamics that I have right now. The more people you have, the more difficult it naturally is to manage because you're going to have personality conflicts. You're going to have, um, you know, one of the things that I was dealing with was uh, this one individual who left was constantly complaining about another person. And that's part of the reason why they left. And so it was difficult for me because I could clearly see um, what the problem was, and the person that was complaining wasn't wrong, but like you, it's like, well, this other person is an actual person, and I can just be cutthroat about it, or I can try and work with everybody where they because frankly, the person who left had their own issues too. So Anyway, it's just not easy. There's no exact right answer.
Yes.
Um,
We just the best thing that we've tried to do. So we actually have some. We have what we call 5 mindsets
mm-hmm.
we use to kind of promote some. What I'd say we have 5 mindsets and 5 standards. Our 5 mindsets are kindness, assume the best intentions, go with an attitude of inquiry and not accusation,
Mm-hmm.
have an attitude of gratitude and an attitude of forgiveness.
Right.
And so, kindness, assume the best intentions, um, attitude of inquiry. Those 3 things have actually, in particular, have been really helpful uh, in managing some of those dynamics. Then our 5 standards are specific to property management, just our KPIs for property management, and so we have accountability standards around those. So if we retain in mind those mindsets, it seems to be helping us employ our KPIs and hold people accountable to our standards a little bit more easily, which has been good. So I can kindly say, look, this is the expectation we have.
Mm-hmm.
Help me understand why you're having a hard time here, or where this challenge is. What can we do to solve it? Okay, let's set some standards. If you can't solve this, and we do need to make a change, and that's something that's been very beneficial from bringing on somebody who has that skill set in our office. She's helped me out considerably, and
Makes sense. I mean, your business in particular is all about managing relationships. So having an HR manager take some of that load off of you, who actually is trained to, um, what's the right word for an HR manager? Trained to really understand and work with all perspectives. Is that a good way to?
she can handle motivation. She knows what skill sets people need for specific jobs.
Mm-hmm.
She's able to establish performance plans, accountability.
Yeah, I'm sure she's a great asset.
Yeah, she's been great.
So moving back to kind of what I brought up briefly there, um, like I said, we as entrepreneurs, you're in the constant fix it, fix it, fix it mentality. And like you said, you don't know what's going to work and what isn't going to work, because there's a lot of risk associated with that. And the main purpose of this podcast is not only to highlight successful entrepreneurs like you, but it's to discuss, how does that affect your family, and kind of some of the tools and active work that you've done to mitigate some of the things that make you a successful entrepreneur but can be kind of a detriment because it's like too powerful within a family relationship. Maybe that was a
No,
messy question.
I can riff on that. So, um, one thing that kind of came to mind as you were talking about that, it's almost unfair in some ways, because let's talk maybe specifically about the spousal dynamic.
Mhm.
Early on, one of the things I learned is when it comes to being an entrepreneur, you need to have your spouse on board. Um,
Yeah,
you
and
have,
that's hard sometimes.
um, I know some folks that they're like, the spouse will not let them be an entrepreneur because the spouse wants
The
stability.
stability.
Um, my bless her heart, my wife has told me so many times, I hate your job. So many times.
Yeah, I just got that yesterday.
And so, and it's just, she doesn't like the nature of the work. She's not a conflict oriented person. She doesn't like to engage in conflict. I could care less. It's, again, conflict is a problem to be solved.
Right.
She doesn't like conflict. At home, if we have a challenge, it's a problem to be solved.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't want to have it. Sometimes, no, I don't want to solve it. I just want you to listen.
Yeah.
So, I've learned that not all things need to be fixed. Sometimes they just need to be heard.
If I can interject a little bit here, my own personal experience, like even just yesterday, my wife and I kind of got into an intense conversation, and I just kept making it worse and worse and worse. Just because I'm teaching this stuff doesn't mean that I mastered it. How's that? You know what I'm saying? And I'm like, how am I making this worse when I'm trying so hard to make it better? But that's the trick of it all. Is like I'm trying too hard to make it better. That's that's like the catch 22.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
That's
One of
right.
the things that I teach in my course is that entrepreneurs have a tendency to listen to solve problems. That's what we do all day, as I've pointed out a few times in this conversation. But in successful family dynamics, you're supposed to listen to show love, and it's like it doesn't mean that you can't solve problems, but it's a different focus and a different mindset. Because if you're constantly solving your spouse's or your children's problems and constantly placing yourself in the entrepreneur mindset, you're going to create resentment and you're going to create dependency as well. They're going to be hyper dependent upon, your decisions. And so finding that balance is hard. I mean,
I
what's
totally.
been your experience?
Probably heard me typing, but I like that. I love that distinction. Listen, entrepreneurship is listen to solve problems. Family is listen to show love. I think that's a really, really good distinction there. And it's interesting because for one of the other challenges that sometimes comes to mind is as somebody in business, I have a business coach. I have I have employees who are specialists in certain things. I am constantly attending seminars uh, and trainings and conferences to help me be a better business manager and a better people manager. And and this is right, I mentioned a little bit earlier. It's kind of unfair in some ways because I come home and I've been practicing all these skill sets,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, and my wife's like, hey, we need to plan this. I'm like, great, put it on the calendar. And she's like, and it's like I'm like in calendar world,
Right.
but she doesn't use that tool.
No.
And so that's just or I'll be like, well, you gotta set expectations. You gotta set a clear direction with the kids, and because that's what I've been taught by my HR manager and my business coach. I need to set expectations with my employees and with my set clear direction and things. And so I will sometimes bring these business practices to the family.
And they're not bad. There's nothing that says that they're bad. It's just the focus,
Yeah,
you know?
it's good stuff, but it's something that my spouse has not had the opportunity to learn
Mm-hmm.
and practice, and it could help her. But sometimes, when your husband's the one who's, yeah, it's better coming from her peer group than it is from the spouse. Just
Yeah.
what it is.
Yeah, but back to my story yesterday, like the only way that I successfully was able to navigate the difficult situation that we were facing as a couple was I finally had to step back and really just shut down my wife has been laughing in the background and shut down my like need to like, well, why don't you just do this or why don't you just do that? Because a lot of it turns into why don't they just do something instead of stepping back and being like, no, I really hear you. What you're experiencing is really hard. And like, not, I mean, in relationship courses and stuff, you're taught to parrot back what they say, but there's a difference between parroting back and like mimicking what they say and really understanding what they say. And that's a talent and a skill that you can use. Sorry, I'm having a really hard time with my headphone here. It just won't stay in. Anyway, it's a talent that can be um, developed in all aspects of life, which is really listening to understand. I mean, and not to fix. I kind of got this feeling in my head. No, you need to be one of her girlfriends.
That's awesome.
that the girlfriend isn't going to listen and say, well, you need to do this and well, you need to do that. The girlfriend's going to be like, what the hell, that's awful. And really empathize and which is difficult because it's difficult to really take that on without taking offense and without
Yeah.
just taking it personally and shutting down. That's my biggest thing. When I feel attacked, I start to shut down.
Gotcha.
I mean,
a lot of it can be ego too. You got to set that ego aside and listen for what the other person's need is.
mm-hmm.
And that's a fun one for sure.
So in your business, it sounds like you've done quite a bit to, well, especially in hiring the HR person, you're starting to optimize and automate some of the processes a little bit more. And that is another focus of this podcast, is to discuss with you how you're doing that so that you can balance your family life a little bit more, because obviously you can't be everything to everybody all the time. And so, especially with a business your size, how have you been optimizing and automating this so that you're not always in the hot seat?
Honestly, it's evolution. I'll explain what I mean by that. I've had from day one, basically, well, day one meaning I graduated and I was like, okay, I'm going to do this. I had a vision of what this was going to look like. Not all entrepreneurs have that, but I've always had a specific number in my head and a specific idea as to how that was going to look and what it was going to need to get there. And I've just had this tenacious patience with that process of getting there. So I would say, I mean, from day one, I've imagined us as a large company, and and I'm like, okay, if I know I'm going to be a large company someday, what do I need to do to get to that point?
Mm-hmm.
This was when I was just me.
Right.
And I was like, well, what's the first thing I need? I need a second person.
Right. Yeah.
And to be honest, that's where I typically start. There's a guy named Dave Crenshaw who I highly recommend. He likes to teach on small business and entrepreneurship. He's got off the charts ADHD, which appeals to me. And
yeah, I can relate.
He does these little blurbs, and one of them is he talks about Batman has an Alfred for a reason, and entrepreneurs need to do likewise. And so having an assistant was the first hire I ever made, and continues to be one of the best things to have. I've had assistants off and on over the years, and assistants evolve based on how your company evolves.
Mm-hmm.
So that assistant eventually became an assistant property manager, and then I had more property managers, and I just keep adding people. But as I was growing my company, the systems consisted of number one, the business practices themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Big mistakes entrepreneurs make is they don't actually codify and document their business practices. It stays way too much in their head.
Mm-hmm.
Mine has been written down for years and continues to be written down. I have somebody now whose specific job is to cure our business practices.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been very helpful to us. So we write down our business practices. I have an assistant who, again, back in the day, I had an assistant who would do this. And what we would do is I obviously did almost everything in the beginning. I did the marketing, I did the finance, I did the management, I did the HR, all of it. And as we grew, I would then piece off parts of it to the next person. So at first it was just me and an assistant. Then it was me plus an assistant property manager. Then it was me plus a secretary doing some maintenance stuff. Then it was me plus 3 property managers and the secretary doing maintenance stuff. And then the secretary and the maintenance coordinator were separated into two separate roles, and and we just kind of continue to grow and divide and grow and divide, kind of like how cells actually work. They use divide, grow, divide, grow, divide. And so we're just continually dividing the roles as we scale. And that's been a challenge, obviously, because that means you're wearing a lot of hats at first. But doing that has helped us to grow steadily. And again, having those extra people, that's a huge relief. I have, actually, one of the other things that I've found that's very helpful, I've always, one of the mistakes a lot of entrepreneurs make is they don't actually carve out for themselves a real salary. They just kind of, their income is the profit, which that's fine when you're small.
Right.
Start growing, you actually need to start defining what your job actually is and what your salary actually is. So I take a salary from the company separate from my distributions from the company. And the theory that I can replace myself just like I can replace anybody else in the company.
Yeah. So, now, with what you've just described, the challenge for entrepreneurs is stepping back in the end, like you said, because you've been so involved and so into it, and and it's kind of an addiction, the grow and the divide, see how big you can get. But the challenge is like looking at that as one system and looking at your family as another system with its own needs, and having the know-how and the capability to kind of say when at a certain point and start not necessarily scaling back your business, but scaling back your part in the business and allowing yourself to be, because I mean, how many hours a week do you work, just out of curiosity right now? Honestly, it's hard to say sometimes, because it's like hit and miss with entrepreneurs, but what would you think on average?
It's probably 45 to 50.
Yeah. And
pretty manageable.
Normal. Yeah, that sounds pretty normal and manageable. It's just, again, the biggest aspect and the biggest reason I started this podcast is that the balance isn't easy. I promote a 40-40-20 approach. 40% of your time to your business, 40% to your home, 20% to personal time and development. But as I've said before, that's a lot easier said than done, and you're not going to always have the time and capacity to do that even split. I mean, sometimes literally your business is going to take 100%, and you're not going to be able to find that balance. So, I just feel like an open discussion about it, the challenges that I still face. I'm working on myself, and really, when I'm with my family, being with my family and not having the entrepreneur brain flipped on in the back, and, your spouse is talking and you're thinking about how your client just tore apart your apartment in your case or something like that, and then you're not really listening to your spouse. So it's not easy, and so it's just a matter of creating awareness of the tendencies that we have that, again, make us successful entrepreneurs, but can also take us away from having a successful family.
Yeah, for me, I'm fortunate. I started, in fact, the running joke with a lot of entrepreneurs is a lot of them start when they're in college and they have no responsibilities. But in fact, this entrepreneurship professor mentioned that the MBAs make the worst entrepreneurs because they're usually getting a six-figure job and don't have the desire to bail and leave the student. Whereas college students that aren't married with families have nothing to lose. One of the things that I've done, I was fortunate that I was able to scale it when I did not have a lot of obligations, to the point where now that I do have a lot of obligations, I've been able to have the support staff to handle things. But a big thing for me has been boundaries, for sure. Like, property management in and of itself tends to not have boundaries, but I've found that I could
You
actually.
can get calls at all hours of the night, theoretically, and I'm sure you have at certain points.
Yeah, so I basically figured out how to outsource that.
Right.
Like, okay, do I really have to do that, or can I manage that in some capacity that somebody else could handle that? There are companies out there that will gladly field those calls for me. So
Mm-hmm.
pay somebody else to do that.
Right.
Um, the one thing that's funny enough is this little thing
Mm-hmm.
actually a good boundary set.
Oh
So
yeah.
I this thing can do a lot of stuff, right? What I did was number one, with part of my ADD is I have very few notifications on my phones. I have like text, phone call, and my next calendar event. The only notifications that I allow to pop up on my phone or my watch.
Mm-hmm.
The thing I like about my watch is I leave my phone and I have my watch. If it's super urgent that somebody does call or text me, they can still get me, but I won't be distracted by this thing.
Yeah, that's a good strategy.
So my watch has nothing on it. It's like literally it's like phone. It's the phone, the text, and the calendar. Um, and so I can leave my phone. I always clock out of work around 6 o'clock. That was a piece of advice I was given that I've been put because I do live and die by my calendar. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I've I've really tried to, and it helps with setting expectations with my spouse. She knows what my work schedule is,
Mm-hmm.
and so I quit at 6, and then I go spend time with family, and I don't pick up again until 8 if I have to pick up again.
Mm-hmm.
So if I am working a longer day, I'll do like an 8:30 a.m. to 6 p.m., 8 to 10 if I have to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's been helpful with the calendar, budgeting my time, and really so little of what I mean, even though I'm a compulsive problem solver in an industry that in fact impacts people very personally.
Right.
There's emergencies all the time, but what I've found is when it comes down to it, there really actually isn't that much that has to be done right now. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and we talk about we live in this culture of now, but what really needs to what's honestly instead of a culture of now, we have to have this culture of when, and that's one of the things that this Dave Crenshaw had told me as well is that culture of when means people are used to getting something right now, but they're perfectly satisfied if you say I can't do that right now, but here's when I can,
Mm-hmm.
and then you do it when you can. They're very satisfied with that. And
Right.
so that's what we've been trying to do is like, unless it's like a flood, gas, or heat problems, I can deal with it tomorrow.
Yeah.
We've narrowed it, we've distilled it down to that. And then those three things, you know, we've we've figured out we have a pathway through a third party call center that handles those calls to our vendor pool. So even those I rarely have to deal with it. So sometimes it's just breaking down and saying, okay, what do I honestly need to deal with right now, or can it wait? And and so what I found is that the stuff that makes me busy is the stuff I should have said no to. Frankly, that's a weakness that I have. Is I have a lot of I see opportunity everywhere, and I need to just say no. I need to get better at saying no.
Just say no.
Yeah.
You're like I knew what was it, the bear or
So there's a Steve Jobs quote that says focus is about saying no.
yeah.
I've been trying to do that, because even though we have these big goals for our company and all the different things we want to pursue, big goals personally, and all the things I want to pursue, I have a ridiculous number of hobbies that I like to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's had to say no. And I don't play paintball anymore. I love paintball, but I don't play it anymore. Just it's
Right.
consuming, and so it's on the shelf right now. Literally, the paintball gun's on the shelf.
Yeah.
but instead I play Legos with my kids. That's one of my other hobbies. I love Legos. You know this. And so
Yeah,
I've
that's one thing you and my wife have in common.
right.
Legos.
And so and so I've had to as a company. I would love to get into fix and flips. We're just
Hmm.
not there yet. And so so we have chosen to not pursue that. And sometimes it's tough to say no, but that's helping us focus on being good at what we do right now. Because if I can get really good, even better, better than we are right now, I can be more profitable with less effort,
Hmm.
rather than continue to dump burden on myself.
Right.
So that's one of the things that I'm working on personally.
That makes a lot of sense. I've been doing the same process of trying to focus and specialize and not spread myself too thin because I'm exactly like you in the fact that, oh well, maybe this will work or maybe this will work or this will work, and I could do all of these different things to, like, with one of my pet projects, or it's now my main business at this point, but it's been so many different things. And it's been an advantage to me because I have been able to roll with the punches. But the disadvantage is you can't focus, you can't um, specialize, and it creates trauma within the marriage because my brain is constantly focused on, well, maybe I can do this, maybe I can do that. And I don't have enough brain space left to listen and to be there, even though I am there. And even though I do care, some of the things that my wife has said to me over the years has been shocking. And because, here I am, a genuinely caring individual, and, she doesn't feel cared for. And that's what caused me to really step back and be like, okay, well, what is different about me and my dynamics that is causing this toxicity? Because, like, I am genuinely a caring person. I try to listen. Again, I'm practicing a different approach now that I understand and realize what I have been doing. I feel like a lot of times, in order to solve a problem, you have to know what the problem is specifically within your specific circumstances.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things that I've been working on. I don't know. Do you have any other input or questions that you've been dealing with in your marriage dynamics
Oh,
that you want to bring up? I'm sure that you can empathize with what I'm talking about because.
sure. Um, you know, my wife, bless her heart, she's been pretty good about letting me know what her specific requirements are, and I try to keep those in mind. She kind of lets she's extremely low maintenance, which is an incredible blessing. um, but she obviously has her needs, so trying to make sure we have those. I mean, we always have dedicated time Sunday evenings, just the two of us, where
Mhm.
we call it couples council, where we just talk about kind of what's coming up this week, what are some of the things we'd like to work on together. We set goals together, and that just even having that time, and we have other time together, of course, but that dedicated meeting time has been very helpful.
Mhm.
But she won't always speak up either, so I have to be an active listener and just be like, if someone's. I think one of the areas where I struggle with right now, as I mentioned earlier, I live and die by my calendar.
Mhm.
um, Making sure that I'm using my time wisely and making sure that, like, I don't know if that whole 6 to 8 is enough time during the week.
Mhm.
I also do Saturdays and Sundays with the family. Sometimes half my Saturday I do spend working.
Mhm.
um, but I, it's a funny thing that my kids will come out and they'll say, I have this one kid, my middle kid, her, it's, I swear it's like a trigger. I walk out, Daddy, can you play with me? It is a trigger, I swear. And so I've had to make sure that I do say yes often enough
Mhm.
that she doesn't feel like I'm always saying no. And
Right.
and when I do say no, I try to give her the reason why. Like, well, it's still my work time. I'm still when it's 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, then I'll be able to, you know, clock out, so to speak, and walk out of this office, and I'm good to go. So, but knowing how much that time should be is the hard part, because there are, you could work 50, 60-hour weeks easily.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's kind of where my question still remains is am I dedicating enough time? Is she getting enough play with me time?
Right.
And then when you got 3 kids, they help.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many. I kind of view my brain as a computer. I mean, it's not really that far-fetched of an example, but you've got all these windows that are open, and you're trying to navigate all these tabs, basically. And, the more kids, especially, that you have, the more challenging navigating that is going to be, along with your wife and so forth. And I appreciate your vulnerability because, you know, again, none of this discussion is about whether what we've been doing in the past is right or wrong. It's a matter of, like, in both in myself and in other entrepreneurs, just creating awareness that there are competing interests here, because we go, like you said, you go to so many trainings all the time that are rah, you're doing awesome, and this is how you become a successful entrepreneur, and you're like, yeah, I'm doing all those things, I'm a great person. And then you don't take the time sometimes, or at least I don't, to really think about how, all of those things that you've been learning and been patted on the back for don't exactly always translate successfully over to marriage and family. And so again, they have some competing, I don't want to say competing interests, because that's not probably the right framework. It's more of just different interests. They have this plant needs this type of nourishment, and that plant needs that type of nourishment. It doesn't mean that they are competing. It just is like, you can't you can't put the same thing in each one, otherwise you'll kill the other potentially.
Yeah. It's one of the things you hear a lot is that whole work-life balance thing. I heard recently, actually, it's not about work-life balance, it's about work-life integration.
Mm-hmm.
How do you integrate the two, not necessarily balance the two?
Right.
Really fun. I've really enjoyed, frankly, this whole COVID thing because I've been home.
Yeah.
And so it's important to take breaks regularly throughout your workday. And the fun thing is I get to go take my breaks with my family.
Mm-hmm.
And I really, really enjoyed that piece, is that when I take my 15-minute break, it's upstairs with the kids for 15 minutes. And their attention spans aren't that long anyway. So
Right.
I go up, I get my break, I spend time with them, they're happy, I come back down, and they have really, the first week, they struggled to kind of respect the time and my door shut.
Mm-hmm.
But even the 3-year-old knows that if my door's shut, it's because I'm probably working, and so she knows to wait till I'm coming out of the office and stuff. So it's been working good. And this is the thing. I just making sure that's where I'm kind of still trying to figure that out, is how much time for different activities and things. But if, as long, my very first goal was to have it be focused time. And then my second goal was, is it the right amount of time?
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like I've gotten the focus time pretty good at this point. So now it's all a matter of, like, am I giving it the right time, or am I?
And just to clarify, when you say focus, you're not meaning like you're looking for a specific outcome. You mean, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're focused on them. You're not focused elsewhere. Because
Right.
I could see some people taking focus time as like, okay, we're going to sit down and we're going to do X, Y, and Z. When children don't work that way, obviously. It's a lot more unstructured, but the focus is on them and their needs, and showing love to them.
It's funny that, as you mentioned that. So when my wife and I went to Disney World or Disneyland with the kids for the first time, and when they we went there with the intention of not caring what we did. Usually when you go to those things yourself when you're older, you're like, okay, I got to get on this ride, this ride, this ride, this ride, this ride, and then we're going to go to this one at this time, and we're going to do this, and we got to make sure we clock in, we got to get our fast pass here.
Right.
We just showed up and followed them the entire day.
Right.
And it was incredible. It was so much fun. We saw some of the, like, just to follow them around as they would just go look at something. We got on like 5 rides, probably.
Right.
I get my money's worth on rides? No. But money's worth on my kid, really enjoying the entire thing? Yes. And so focusing on them and watching them just do whatever was super rewarding. It was great for them. They had a wonderful experience. But yeah, I mean, they want to ride the merry-go-round 5 times? Sure. Go nuts. Why not? I don't care. I don't need to go get to the Matterhorn.
Right.
And they would find these obscure things that I had never been to because I never cared because it was not one of the bigger rides, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so my point in sharing that story about how rewarding that was is I'm it's like the focus thing. When I put my phone down and I blocked out the time, everybody knows you're not going to get me. I'm not answering the phone. If it's really urgent, maybe send me a text message. I'll glance at it and decide if I really think it's urgent or not. But the phone's not in the way, and I just kind of try to focus on them and whatever it is that they want to do. If they want to go play, with slime, that was yesterday. Or dominoes was this morning. I mean, just whatever inane thing they want to do. And so that's what I've been trying to do. And I've had to. What's been interesting, I've had to change my perspective to be satisfied with that.
Which is counterintuitive in some ways when you take it into the framework of entrepreneurship, because you're constantly trying to frame and structure and optimize, but that's not what you're describing here.
Exactly.
But it's like vitally important to understand, and I think that's a great I don't know, talk about it, revelation,
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that in that contrast, but you're right. It really is different. And so yeah, so that's the I guess maybe one last thing that's been kind of hard for me that I would share is that one of the things about being an entrepreneur is deciding I mentioned kind of what my end game is, but sometimes understanding, as I've tried to tweak that end game, it's interesting to say, well, where do you want to put your limit? And what I mean by that is particularly in the worldly sense of, your bank account or your house or your cars, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
If I want to have this level of house, car, bank account, that's going to require this level of work.
Mm-hmm.
But if I be satisfied with this level, I just freed up a ton of time and stress and pressure.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's something that I've been working on. I've been trying to say, I have a nice house. I don't need a monster house. My car is paid for. It's 15 years old, but it's paid for and it's in good condition, and I should be very satisfied with that. Those are some of those areas, because that helps because if I don't need to worry about making a payment on that, then I have to extra. And
we as entrepreneurs idolize these people who have achieved this highest form of success. We go to conferences and listen to them and so forth, but what you just described is not often how many of them will live their lives, because it's all about improving and it's all about expanding and growing and so forth. But yeah, I mean, it's really almost kind of a counterintuitive, like, when is enough enough? When do I need to sit back and just be okay with what I have so that I can enjoy and help, other things that don't require so much focus on building, but just require elements of like just sitting back and enjoying it in order to help it flourish. That wasn't very well put, but I think you get the idea.
So that's a good example. So let's take it as an example. So in my business, I could remove several things from my business and triple my income today. I would significantly increase my personal workload, but I'd have a ton more income.
Mm-hmm.
But why?
Right.
And so my business can still grow and can still be successful and can still increase in revenue and profitability and employ more people without necessarily having to burden me more. I guess is what I'm saying. It is possible because I'll give you an example. I got this one friend of mine. He has a business very similar in size to me. His take-home income is twice what mine is,
mm-hmm.
and he works 65 hours a week.
Yeah.
And I was like, friend, why don't you cut that? Why don't you carve off some of that money and go pay somebody and carve off some of that load and let them do it? People would appreciate opportunities for employment. Give them opportunities for employment. Help another family become successful.
Right.
And his answer to me, frankly, he says, honestly, I've grown accustomed to this lifestyle. He says, I have this lifestyle right now that's used to this level of income, and for me to do that, I'd have to cut my lifestyle. That's just not something I'm able to do. And it was just like,
well, and from a family perspective, when you bring in the two systems together, family and business, they do overlap. And in one way that I have discussed in my course multiple times is that, with you, if you started failing more at your family, eventually you would get divorced, more than likely. I mean, depending upon how severe it was. But that would have a tendency to cut everything that you've done in half. So again, the question is like, again, you come to this conclusion of why, like you just said, why am I going to build it that much more when it could be cut in half? Because you see all of these, I mean, it's a prime example why you see some of these billionaires lose half of everything just because they don't understand, from my perspective, they do not understand that principle that you just described so eloquently. So
it's been a good stress reducer to kind of sit there and say, and in fact, what's interesting, Rich Dad Poor Dad's cash flow game.
mm-hmm.
It's a fun little game. If you ever played
Right? Yeah, I played it. It's a good game.
So thing about it is that the way you get out of the rat race is by making sure that your passive income exceeds your lifestyle.
Right.
And what's incredible is it's easier to manage your lifestyle sometimes than it is to get your income out.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you can get yourself debt free, it's a whole lot easier to get out of the rat race.
Right.
Now that's a whole topic for another day, but the message is it's okay to have a modest lifestyle and still have a huge business that you can be proud of.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of where I'm at. Is I want to have a big, successful, huge business, but I don't necessarily feel like I need to have a huge, grandiose personal lifestyle.
Right.
And so that has enabled me to maintain a certain level of sanity, still growing a significant business. And
right. What you've done is really incredible, especially as I've heard you talk about the balance and the struggle that you've gone through. I'm really impressed with everything that you've accomplished, because not that any of us are perfect, not that you're perfect, or not that I'm perfect in how we've gotten to where we are, but I think it's important to okay, we've gotten where we are. What are the lessons that we've learned along the way? And it sounds like you've learned some extremely valuable lessons one way or the other.
Mm.
And, the only thing that we can do from this point forward and is work to apply those lessons and move forward and just do better, but in a more balanced kind of way, not in the better of I'm going to improve everything entrepreneurial kind of way. It's counterintuitive, and if you got that entrepreneur
Well,
mindset and focus 100%, it's gonna it's gonna cause you problems.
yeah, it's one of my business coach asked me one day. She says, well, "What does success look like to you? Define success. Define success personally and define success professionally." And honestly, that was a surprisingly hard thing for me to define.
Yeah,
It was my wake up call. I was realizing how hard it was for me to find that. And so that's been, so that would be some advice I would give to entrepreneurs, is just kind of define what does success look like? How do you know when you've achieved it? Um, and just kind of go from there. So,
yeah,
well, it's been awesome, Riley. It's been fun.
yeah. Thanks so much for taking your time. And just really quick in closing, um, just trying to figure out how to close this smoothly. So, while this podcast is mainly focused on the business side of things, I provide more training and counseling, focusing specifically on developing successful family dynamics for entrepreneurs within the entrepreneur family education course that I teach. In this course, I bring more awareness, like we've discussed today, and I think you've been completely awesome. But bring more awareness to how we as entrepreneurs sometimes have the tendency to hyper focus on our business and neglect our families, which is the largest contributing factor to a 25% higher divorce rate among entrepreneurs on average. So we all know that family trouble and divorce will deeply impact our businesses. So we've got to just keep that in mind. And you can learn more about what I teach at theentrepreneursfamily.com. Again, where do we find you? Just in closing, you said what was the
Utah,
website?
yeah, UtahRentals.com is where our business lives. And honestly, there's only two Jeremiah Maughans out there. So,
Well, it sounds like people who are looking for support in that area, you'll be supporting a great business and a great individual here. So please subscribe to this podcast to listen to more entrepreneurs like Jeremiah here who are working to successfully navigate the balance between business and home life. Also, if you're a successful entrepreneur and you're listening to this and you have a family who would like to be highlighted in this podcast, please contact me at theentrepreneursfamily@gmail.com and tell me a little bit about your business and your family successes. All right. Thanks, Jeremiah. You have a good night, okay?
Thank you. You too. We'll see ya.
Okay. Bye-bye.